Welcome to Kitchen Table Conversations, a series of short and shareable conversation starters for those of us who have or love and support people with a complicated and beautiful brain. Here's your host, Angela Geddes.
Hi, everyone. Welcome back to Kitchen Table Conversations with Angela Geddes. I am your host, and again, thrilled to be here to share some little tidbits of information that might help inspire further conversations and lots of curiosity. So again, we're going to focus today's episode on fetal alcohol spectrum disorder because September 9th is International FASD Awareness Day, and the month of September is spent with lots of us participating in various activities to help raise awareness and to work towards preventing both the incidences and the impact of prenatal alcohol exposure. In this episode, we thought we would start with an up-to-date definition of what fetal alcohol spectrum disorder actually is. So FASD defined is a diagnostic term used to describe impacts on the brain and body of individuals prenatally exposed to alcohol. FASD is a lifelong disability, and individuals with FASD will experience some degree of challenges in their daily living and benefit from support with motor skills, physical health, learning, memory, attention, communication, emotional regulation, and social skills to reach their full potential. Each individual with FASD is unique and has areas of both strengths and challenges. FASD affects 4% of the general population, which is more than autism, Tourette syndrome, Down syndrome, and cerebral palsy combined. Yet this is still so misunderstood. And let's change that. This is why we think it's so important to keep these conversations going. Also, FASD is in all of our circles. This is a disorder that's not just reserved for people who have a history of trauma, addictions, mental health issues, etc. Many of us don't understand that, and there are lots of reasons behind this. We live in a culture where alcohol is just about everywhere, and there seems to be some resistance to embracing the risks associated with alcohol at all. All you have to do is listen to the radio, watch TV, and look at a magazine. Alcohol and establishments that serve are everywhere, and where there is alcohol, there is risk of fetal alcohol spectrum disorder. With 80% of women in childbearing years drinking alcohol and over 50% of pregnancies being unplanned, it's not hard to do the math and recognize that there are many pregnancies exposed to alcohol and many babies at risk of negative impact, developmental, physical, emotional, and mental. And again, this is still really new information for many, many people. As recently as this year, I was having a conversation with some peers and associates who understood that fetal alcohol spectrum disorder resulted from the individual with the disorder having their own alcohol addiction problems. So clearly not realizing that the F was for fetal and totally unaware of the disorder itself and the implications of prenatal alcohol exposure during the pregnancy. These people that I'm talking about are educated adults with management roles within the workforce. So these are not young people. These are adults who are parents themselves. So as recent as this month, I was at 2 separate social gatherings where teachers were in attendance, and both of the teachers were admittedly unaware of FASD and the implications of prenatal alcohol exposure. Both teachers have spent over 20 years in the system. And it's really important to recognize that these are good teachers. I mean, I don't know them all that well. I just met them, but the way that they describe their creativity and their passion and their interest in doing really well and their own shock and embarrassment, actually, of what they didn't know and how you could almost see some of the kids going through their heads and recognizing that maybe they should have supported a few of them in a different way, recognizing that instead of a behavioral approach, this is a brain-based disorder. So again, this is kind of surprising when we know from the statistics that there is one child or youth in every single classroom who either has a confirmed diagnosis or would qualify for an FASD diagnosis if only we could more accurately identify when assessment was necessary and when it was available. Given our current system capacity limitations, we don't have enough practitioners to be able to provide the assessments that everyone needs. So a little context for this, a few short years ago, in 2015 to be exact, we understood that the prevalence rates for FASD were at 1%. And at 1%, that means that we need basically 330-ish thousand FASD assessments completed at that time. But at that time, we had the capacity to provide multidisciplinary team approaches to assessment to just over 2,000 individuals. So at that rate, it would take us over 170 years to assess everyone in need. So we need to think about that for a minute. Think about how many people are actually walking around with what would qualify for a diagnosis, but they don't have a clue. They don't have a clue. The people who they live with don't have a clue. The people that they are working with don't have a clue. Instead, they see this again as mental health conditions and maybe some poor choices, and the person who can't stick to things, and the person who's got some emotional dysregulation, etc. Again, a lot of these people are kind of bouncing and bruising off of some of the guide rails that society puts in place for them, for people who they assume to have complicated mental health and addiction issues, and are simply unaware that they are struggling due to a brain condition that resulted from prenatal alcohol exposure. So now that we know the prevalence rates is 4%, some say a little bit higher, and there's certainly higher pockets and communities that have higher rates. Now we have to multiply that number by 4. I mean, obviously, the number of people out there that are struggling without any awareness of what's really going on is quite high. And when we think about the cost to society, I mean, the cost of misdiagnosis, it's clear that it costs money to provide services that are not helpful. When I was coordinating the assessment clinic a few years ago and doing some more research, I did a quick chart review, and this little person was 9 years old. And by the time this little person got to us for an assessment, this was the first time that prenatal alcohol exposure was even considered. But prior to that, there was residential treatment, there was 10 plus psychiatric evaluations, there were many pediatric evaluations and assessments and follow-up appointments, there were speech and language assessments, occupational therapy assessments, and a couple of psychology assessments that were done throughout her very short life to that date. So to the cost of $94,000 was spent, and the family was at risk of falling apart eventually. So it was, obviously if you're into math at all, that's not a really wise way to spend our money. It is worth the investment to do a better screening and to ask the questions about prenatal alcohol exposure, or at least identify when this is a complex neurodevelopmental disorder rather than mental health and trauma alone. But then also think about how many times that family had to tell and retell their story. We will be including a link to overlapping behavioral characteristics and related mental health diagnoses in children, and we encourage everyone to have a look at it, because really there are a lot of overlapping characteristics and a lot of opportunity to look for some clarity around what's really going on with the people that we're loving and we're supporting. With many thanks, everyone, for tuning in. Have a great day.